Before we descend into the shadows of forgotten history, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what is the hour in your city? Settle in. Let the world outside fade. Tonight we explore a question that has echoed through millennia, whispered in temples and carved into stone. They said goodbye. They ascended into the heavens. They returned to the distant stars. At least, that is what the ancient tablets tell us. But what if the departure was merely a story, and the story was nothing more than a mask? What if they never truly left at all? Tonight, we trace the hidden thread through time, the presence that withdrew from sight but never truly departed from this ancient earth. The watchers who became invisible to our eyes. The architects who stepped willingly into shadow. Let your breath slow now and listen closely. Let the night settle gently around you and consider this profound truth. Absence can be performed. Departure can be theater. Vanishing can be illusion. Those with the longest perspective sometimes choose to wait in patient silence rather than announce themselves openly. This is the story of what remained behind. What remained when the gods supposedly vanished from mortal view? This is the question that refuses to fade across the ages of human memory. What if the Anunnaki never truly departed from this world? The Sumerian tablets speak of departure, but do they tell the complete truth? After thousands of years of visible presence on Earth, the Anunnaki prepared to leave. Their great work was complete, or so they claimed to humanity, or so the ancient records would suggest. Humanity had been established. Civilization had been seeded. The systems were firmly established, locking our destiny in place. According to the ancient accounts, the great gods gathered their followers, dismantled their primary installations, and ascended in their celestial vessels. The sky blazed with their departure. The earth trembled as connections were severed. And then silence fell across the land. Humanity was left alone. Or so the story goes. The priests recorded the departure with grief and confusion. The temples that had once hummed with divine presence grew cold. The oracles fell silent. The direct communication that had guided kings and commoners alike simply stopped. For generations after, humans looked to the sky and waited. They built towers reaching upward. They performed rituals designed to summon the departed. They interpreted every unusual light, every strange sound, as a sign of return. But the gods did not come back, at least not openly. This is the official narrative, the departure narrative, the story that explains why divine beings no longer walk among us, why miracles became rare, why the sky grew distant and cold. It is a story of abandonment that shaped religions for millennia. But consider this. The tablets were written by humans who recorded only what they were permitted to witness, humans who interpreted events through limited understanding, humans who might have witnessed a performance rather than a departure. What if the Anunnaki did not leave? What if they simply changed their relationship with visibility? The difference between departure and concealment is intention. Departure ends presence. Concealment continues it in shadow. And beings with technology thousands of years ahead of their observers would have understood this distinction perfectly. To leave is to surrender influence. To hide is to maintain it from a position of invisibility. For beings who had invested millennia in shaping a world, complete abandonment seems strategically unsound. Why would you leave a project unfinished? Why would you abandon an investment of such magnitude? Unless the departure itself was part of a longer plan. Unless invisibility served purposes that presence could not. The tablets tell us they left. But the tablets were written for human consumption, and what is written for an audience is always shaped by what the audience is meant to believe. Consider the situation from the Anunnaki perspective. You have spent thousands of years developing a planet. You have invested enormous resources in creating and refining a species. You have established systems of governance, agriculture, and knowledge transmission. You have built infrastructure that will endure for ages. And then you simply walk away? This makes no strategic sense. Any intelligent entity capable of interstellar travel would understand the value of long-term observation. Any civilization that invests millennia in a project does not casually abandon it. The human tendency is to assume that if beings are not visible, they are not present. But this assumption reflects human limitations, not universal truth. We cannot see radio waves, yet they fill the air around us. We cannot perceive ultraviolet light, yet it shapes our world. Visibility is a narrow band of reality. Beings with advanced technology would have countless methods of remaining present without being perceived. Bases underground, installations beneath the oceans, stations in orbit, dimensional refuges that human senses cannot access. The options multiply when technology exceeds imagination. The question is not whether they could remain hidden. The question is why they would choose to. The answer may lie in the nature of observation itself. When you observe a system openly, your presence affects the system. When you observe from concealment, you see the system as it truly operates. The Anunnaki, if they remained, would have shifted from active management to passive observation. This transition makes sense developmentally. Parents guide children closely in early years, then step back to allow independence while still watching. Teachers instruct directly, then observe from distance as students apply what they have learned. The pattern repeats across every mentoring relationship. If the Anunnaki viewed humanity as a developing project, visible departure followed by invisible observation would be a natural progression. Let them grow. Let them struggle. Let them succeed or fail on their own terms. But watch. Always watch. This explains the persistent sense across cultures that something is observing humanity. The feeling that eyes are upon us. The intuition that we are not alone even when we cannot see anyone present. Perhaps this is not paranoia. Perhaps it is accurate perception filtered through limited awareness. The Anunnaki may never have left at all. They may simply have stepped behind a curtain that human eyes cannot penetrate. If the Anunnaki remained on Earth in hiding, we would expect to find certain patterns. Not direct evidence, because concealment would prevent that, but indirect signatures, anomalies, events that make more sense if invisible observers exist than if humanity is truly alone. Consider the persistence of intervention narratives across cultures. In every civilization, stories emerge of hidden helpers who appear at critical moments. Angels in the Judeo-Christian tradition, devas in Hindu thought, kami in Japanese belief, ancestors in African traditions. Different names, but remarkably similar functions. These beings are described as watching, sometimes intervening, always observing from a realm adjacent to, but separate from, ordinary human experience. They appear when humanity faces crisis. They withdraw when stability returns. They seem to have agendas that span centuries rather than human lifespans. Mainstream scholarship explains these patterns as psychological projections, human minds creating invisible guardians to comfort existential anxiety. But this explanation assumes the conclusion. It begins with the premise that such beings cannot exist, then interprets all evidence accordingly. What if the interpretation is inverted? What if the persistence of these narratives reflects actual observation of actual beings? What if humans across cultures, across millennia, have been catching glimpses of the same hidden presence and naming it according to their cultural frameworks? The Anunnaki, if they remained, would not identify themselves by that name. Names are merely cultural masks. The same beings observed by Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, and modern people would be described in radically different terms. But the underlying reality could be consistent. Watchers who do not age. Beings with technology indistinguishable from magic. Entities that appear during pivotal moments and vanish without trace. This description fits the Anunnaki as described in ancient texts, and also fits the mysterious helpers described in countless later traditions. The simplest explanation for this consistency is continuous presence. The same observers, watching the same species across the entire span of recorded history and beyond. One theory suggests the Anunnaki withdrew not to the stars, but beneath the surface of Earth itself. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe beings who dwell in underground realms. The Sumerian Abzu, the realm of Enki, was specifically associated with subterranean waters. The Anunnaki, in original texts, were connected to the underworld as much as to the sky. Modern geology confirms that vast spaces exist beneath Earth's surface. Caverns extending for miles, underground rivers and lakes, spaces that human exploration has barely touched. If advanced beings sought concealment, the underground offers advantages that surface hiding cannot match. Underground installations would be protected from surface detection methods. They would be shielded from satellite observation. They would be insulated from the chaos of human conflict. They would provide stable environments regardless of surface climate changes. The technology required to create and maintain underground habitats is not beyond imagination. Humans have built underground cities, from the ancient Derinkuyu in Turkey to modern military installations. Beings with superior technology could create far more sophisticated subterranean environments. Legends of underground races appear across cultures. The Scandinavians spoke of the dwarves who dwelt beneath mountains. The Greeks described the realm of Hades beneath the earth. Native American traditions include beings who emerged from underground worlds. Hindu texts describe the Nagas, serpent beings who live in underground palaces. These consistent themes could reflect cultural imagination responding to the mystery of caves and caverns. Or they could reflect observation, partial and filtered, of actual underground inhabitants. Modern reports of unexplained underground phenomena add texture to this possibility. Sounds emanating from deep within the earth that cannot be explained by geological processes. Signals detected from underground sources that do not match natural patterns. Accounts of encounters in cave systems with beings that defy conventional explanation. The underground hypothesis suggests that the Anunnaki departure was horizontal rather than vertical. They did not ascend to the stars, they descended into the earth, into realms prepared long before their supposed departure. They continue their observation from below rather than above. This would explain why the sky grew silent, while the sense of observation persisted. The direction of watching changed, but the watching itself continued. The oceans cover 70% of Earth's surface. Their depths remain largely unexplored. Even with modern technology, we have mapped the surface of Mars more thoroughly than we have mapped our own ocean floors. The deep ocean is the most hidden realm on the planet. If the Anunnaki sought concealment on Earth, the oceans offer ideal conditions. Pressure at depth makes human exploration difficult. Light does not penetrate beyond a few hundred meters. Communications are limited. Detection is nearly impossible. The Sumerian Abzu was associated with the primordial waters beneath the earth and the deep waters of the oceans. Enki, the Anunnaki associated with wisdom and creation, was specifically lord of these waters. The connection between these beings and the deep ocean is ancient and persistent. Unexplained oceanic phenomena suggest something operates in the depths that we do not understand. Unidentified submersible objects have been detected by naval forces worldwide for decades. These objects display capabilities that exceed any known human technology. They appear, they maneuver in ways that defy physics as we understand it, and they vanish into the deep. Military personnel across multiple nations have reported encounters with underwater craft that cannot be explained. These reports are not from isolated incidents, but represent a consistent pattern spanning decades. Something operates in our oceans that is not acknowledged by any government. The deep ocean would provide perfect concealment for beings who wish to remain on Earth while appearing to have departed. Bases constructed at depth would be invisible to satellite observation. They would be protected from surface conflicts. They would have access to the entire planet through the connected ocean system. The Anunnaki, if they never left, may have simply submerged. The sky departure was theater. The real transition was into the depths, where human eyes cannot follow. Another theory suggests the Anunnaki remained on Earth not in hidden bases, but in hidden bloodlines. The ancient texts speak of interbreeding between the Anunnaki and humanity. The offspring of these unions, the Nephilim, or demigods, carried genetic inheritance from both species. If this interbreeding occurred, the genetic legacy would not disappear. It would propagate through generations, diluted but persistent. Some humans today might carry Anunnaki genetic material without knowing it, and some might carry enough to manifest characteristics that set them apart. This would explain the persistent human interest in royal bloodlines and genetic purity. Ruling families across cultures claimed divine ancestry. They maintained genealogies tracing their lineage to gods. They practiced intermarriage to preserve their special genetic inheritance. What if these claims were not mere political propaganda? What if some lineages actually carried genetic material from non-human sources? What if the divine right of kings reflected biological reality rather than convenient mythology? The Anunnaki, in this scenario, never left because they became part of humanity itself. Their physical forms may have departed or concealed themselves, but their genetic presence continued through their hybrid descendants. This would explain the emergence of exceptional individuals throughout history, beings of remarkable intelligence, charisma, or capability who seemed to exceed normal human parameters. Perhaps they represented stronger expression of ancient genetic inheritance. It would also explain the persistent elite interest in genealogy and bloodline purity. If certain families knew or suspected they carried special genetic inheritance, they would guard that inheritance carefully. They would intermarry with other carrier families. They would track lineages with obsessive detail. The bloodline theory suggests the Anunnaki presence on Earth is now distributed rather than concentrated. They are not hidden in bases, but hidden in genes, scattered across the human population, occasionally expressing in individuals who carry stronger concentrations of the ancient inheritance. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the Anunnaki never hid at all. Perhaps they simply changed their appearance. Perhaps they walk among us now, indistinguishable from ordinary humans, yet fundamentally different. The ancient texts describe the Anunnaki as capable of taking different forms. They could appear as humans when they chose. They could modify their appearance to blend with local populations. Shape-shifting is a consistent theme in accounts of divine beings across cultures. If this capability existed, concealment would not require underground bases or oceanic installations. It would require only the will to blend in. The Anunnaki could live among humanity, observing from within rather than from without. This possibility disturbs because it cannot be disproven. If beings can perfectly imitate humans, no test would reveal them. No technology would distinguish them. They would be invisible not through absence, but through perfect mimicry. Consider the individuals throughout history who seem to know more than they should, who appeared at critical moments with crucial information, who influenced events in ways that suggested access to perspectives beyond human scope, who then disappeared without satisfactory explanation. History is full of mysterious figures, advisors to rulers who came from nowhere and vanished without trace, prophets who appeared suddenly with detailed knowledge of the future, inventors who produced technologies that seemed to leap ahead of gradual development. Mainstream history explains these figures as exceptional humans, geniuses who transcended normal limitations. But what if some of them were not human at all? What if they were observers embedded within human society, occasionally intervening when the project required adjustment? The hidden in plain sight hypothesis suggests we cannot recognize the Anunnaki presence because we are looking for something alien. We expect strangeness, but perfect concealment requires familiarity. The most effective observer is the one you never suspect of observing. If the Anunnaki remained on Earth, they would need mechanisms to influence human development without direct intervention. Institutions provide exactly this capability. Once established, institutions perpetuate themselves across generations. They shape human behavior without requiring divine presence. Consider the institutions that have persisted for millennia: religious organizations, banking systems, academic traditions, secret societies. These structures outlast individual humans. They transmit knowledge and influence across centuries. The Anunnaki, if they wish to guide humanity from concealment, would logically have established or infiltrated institutions that could carry their influence forward. They would have created structures that appear human-created, but serve larger purposes. This would explain the remarkable persistence of certain institutional forms. Why do banking practices trace back to ancient Babylon, to the very civilization the Anunnaki founded? Why do religious hierarchies mirror structures described in the Sumerian texts? Why do secret societies claim lineages extending to the gods themselves? Perhaps these are not coincidences. Perhaps these institutions were deliberately established as instruments of long-term influence. Perhaps they continue to serve purposes their human participants do not fully understand. The institution theory suggests the Anunnaki governance did not end. It simply became invisible, operating through human structures that appear to be human-controlled, but may ultimately serve non-human agendas. This is not to claim that all institutions are alien-controlled. Most institutional behavior reflects ordinary human dynamics. But within these systems, subtle influence could operate undetected. Key decisions at key moments could be shaped by parties who are never seen and never acknowledged. The greatest power is the power that does not appear to exist. The Anunnaki, if they remained, would have understood this. They would have built systems that run automatically, requiring only occasional adjustment from invisible operators. The question of method naturally leads to the question of motive. If the Anunnaki remained on Earth, why would they choose concealment over continued open presence? The ancient texts themselves suggest an answer. The Anunnaki were not unified. They disagreed among themselves about humanity's role and future. Some favored direct control. Others preferred guidance. Still others wanted humanity eliminated entirely. This internal conflict may have made open presence impossible. A divided authority cannot govern visibly. The factions would contradict each other. Their disagreements would confuse and destabilize human society. Hidden presence allows each faction to pursue its agenda without direct confrontation. Alternatively, the Anunnaki may have recognized that human development required independence. A species that remains perpetually dependent on external guidance never matures. A species that believes it is alone develops its own capabilities. Parents who want children to grow strong must eventually step back. Teachers who want students to think independently must eventually stop providing answers. The Anunnaki may have understood that their visible presence was preventing human maturation. By appearing to leave, they created space for humanity to develop on its own terms. But by actually remaining, they maintained the ability to intervene if development went catastrophically wrong. This is the logic of the hidden guardian. Present enough to prevent disaster. Absent enough to allow growth. Watching constantly, but intervening rarely. Another possibility is more pragmatic. The Anunnaki may have faced constraints that made continued open presence unsustainable. Perhaps their technology required resources that were becoming scarce. Perhaps their population declined to levels that made governance impossible. Perhaps threats from elsewhere required their active attention. Concealment, in this scenario, was not choice, but necessity. They remained because they could not easily leave. They hid because they could no longer maintain visible control. Whatever the reason, the pattern of hidden presence makes sense only if something valuable was being protected or pursued. Random concealment serves no purpose. Strategic concealment serves many. If the Anunnaki remained on Earth in hidden form, we would expect to find evidence of occasional intervention. Moments when the hidden hand became briefly visible. Events that cannot be explained by human agency alone. History provides numerous such moments. Critical junctures where outcomes seemed to defy probability. Decisions that prevented catastrophe through means that remain unexplained. Technologies that appeared suddenly, as if introduced rather than developed. Consider the moments when human extinction seemed imminent. The Cuban Missile Crisis, where nuclear war was averted through a series of improbable decisions and accidents. The multiple nuclear accidents that could have triggered catastrophe, but were contained through unlikely circumstances. The diseases that emerged, spread, and then mysteriously retreated before achieving pandemic proportions. Mainstream analysis attributes these outcomes to luck, to human wisdom, to natural dynamics. But the pattern is striking. Whenever humanity approaches the brink of self-destruction, something seems to pull us back. This pattern makes sense if observers with investment in human survival are watching and occasionally intervening. Not constantly, not openly, but at critical moments when the project itself is threatened. The interventions, if they occur, would be subtle. A malfunction that prevents a missile launch. A communication that arrives at precisely the right moment. A decision-maker who suddenly changes position for reasons they cannot articulate. These small adjustments, invisible to those experiencing them, could accumulate into a pattern of guided survival. Humanity believes it is navigating alone, but the navigation may be assisted by parties who prefer not to be seen. This is speculation, of course. The evidence is circumstantial. But the pattern of narrow escapes from existential threat is striking enough to invite explanation. And hidden intervention provides an explanation that fits the data. In recent decades, a new category of evidence has emerged. Reports of encounters with non-human beings have multiplied dramatically. UFO sightings, abduction accounts, contact experiences. These reports come from credible witnesses, are documented by military and civilian authorities, and resist conventional explanation. Mainstream discourse has traditionally dismissed these reports as fantasy, misidentification, or psychological disturbance. But the evidence has accumulated to the point where dismissal is no longer intellectually defensible. Government agencies have acknowledged the reality of unidentified aerial phenomena. Military pilots have described encounters that exceed any known human technology. Thousands of individuals with no apparent motive for deception have reported contact with non-human entities. What if these encounters represent contact with the Anunnaki? Not as they appeared in ancient times, when such contact was expected and culturally normalized, but as they appear now, to people who have no framework for understanding what they experience. The beings described in modern encounters often match ancient descriptions of the Anunnaki and their associated entities. Tall beings with unusual proportions, entities associated with advanced technology, communicators who convey messages about human survival and development. The abduction phenomenon, in particular, resonates with ancient themes. Humans taken from their normal environment and subjected to examination. Genetic material collected. Hybrid offspring produced. These themes appear in Sumerian accounts of Anunnaki interaction with humanity. What if the abduction phenomenon represents continued Anunnaki activity? The genetic experimentation that created humanity in the first place may be ongoing. The observers may still be collecting data, refining their creation, monitoring the results of their ancient intervention. This interpretation is disturbing because it implies that humanity is still being managed, that we are subjects of ongoing observation and experimentation, that our sense of autonomy may be partially illusory. But it would explain the persistence of the encounter phenomenon. It would explain why these experiences seem to have purpose beyond random contact. It would explain the genetic focus that appears so frequently in encounter reports. Human perception is limited by human lifespan. We think in terms of decades, occasionally centuries. The Anunnaki, according to ancient texts, measured time in SARs, periods of 3,600 years. Their perspective on time was fundamentally different from ours. From this perspective, the period since their supposed departure is brief. Perhaps 4,500 years have passed since the Sumerian civilization declined. In Anunnaki terms, this might represent a single generation, a brief absence, a momentary withdrawal. What seems to us like permanent departure might seem to them like a short break. Their return, if it occurs, would be on their timeline, not ours. We wait in human time. They operate in cosmic time. This temporal difference explains why the hidden presence might not feel the need to reveal itself. From their perspective, not enough time has passed. The experiment is still running. The observation is still gathering data. The project has millennia left to unfold. Human impatience is a product of human mortality. We want answers now because we do not have forever. The Anunnaki, if they still exist, have different constraints. They can afford to wait. They can afford to watch. They can afford to let centuries pass without action. This perspective also explains why intervention would be rare. If you are observing a process that unfolds over thousands of years, you do not intervene in response to individual human crises. You intervene only when the overall trajectory is threatened. Most human conflicts, disasters, and crises are, from this perspective, minor fluctuations in a larger pattern. They do not require intervention because they do not threaten the underlying project. Only existential threats to the species itself would warrant attention. The hidden Anunnaki, if they exist, are patient beyond human comprehension. They have watched civilizations rise and fall. They have observed empires expand and collapse. They have seen catastrophes that seemed to end everything, followed by recoveries that seemed equally miraculous. Their perspective encompasses the entire sweep of human history as a single moment in a much longer story. And from that perspective, their continued presence makes perfect sense. If the Anunnaki never left, the question of their purpose becomes urgent. Why maintain presence? Why continue observation? What is humanity for? The ancient texts suggest humanity was created to serve the Anunnaki, to perform labor, to worship, to provide something the Anunnaki needed. But the texts are fragmentary and may not capture the complete picture. Perhaps humanity was created as an experiment, a test of what biological intelligence could become, given sufficient time and minimal guidance. The Anunnaki may have seeded consciousness on this planet to observe its development, to study its choices, to learn something that their own evolution did not teach. In this scenario, human history is data. Every war, every peace, every discovery, every mistake, feeds into an understanding that the Anunnaki are building. We are research subjects in an experiment that began before our awareness and continues without our consent. Alternatively, humanity may represent a form of continuation. The Anunnaki, like all beings, presumably face mortality at some scale. Perhaps they created humanity to carry something forward, a genetic inheritance, a spiritual capacity, a potential that the Anunnaki themselves could not develop. Parents create children partly to continue themselves beyond individual death. The Anunnaki may have created humanity for similar reasons. We may be their legacy, their continuation, their hope for persistence beyond their own limitations. This would explain why they remain watching, not as managers, but as parents watching children grow. Not as controllers, but as ancestors hoping their descendants succeed. The purpose may also be reciprocal. Perhaps the Anunnaki need something from humanity that they cannot produce themselves. Energy, attention, something that human consciousness generates that has value in their economy of existence. This darker possibility suggests a relationship that is not purely benevolent. Observation may serve extraction. The hidden presence may be feeding on something that human activity produces. These possibilities are not mutually exclusive. The Anunnaki may have multiple reasons for remaining, just as humans have multiple motivations for any complex action. The truth may be layered rather than simple. If the Anunnaki remained and wished to influence human development without direct intervention, they would need networks, channels through which guidance could flow, structures that could transmit direction while appearing to originate from human sources. Mystery traditions may represent such networks. From ancient Babylon through Greece and Egypt into the medieval and modern periods, chains of initiated individuals have claimed to possess secret knowledge from ancient sources. These traditions consistently claim connection to beings who are not human. They speak of hidden masters. They reference ancient gods who transmitted wisdom to selected humans. They maintain lineages of initiation that stretch back to the earliest civilizations. Mainstream scholarship views these claims as mythology, as the human tendency to embellish origins with divine connections. But what if some of these claims are accurate? What if some initiatic lineages actually do trace back to non-human sources? The Anunnaki, if they wished to guide human development, would logically have established such networks. They would have selected individuals capable of receiving and transmitting guidance. They would have created structures to protect this transmission across generations. The secrecy of these traditions makes sense if the ultimate source prefers not to be known. The hierarchy makes sense if the guidance flows from beings who naturally occupy higher positions. The persistence makes sense if something beyond human motivation maintains the structure. This is not to claim that all mystery traditions connect to the Anunnaki. Most probably represent human attempts to access transcendent knowledge through ritual and practice. But within this larger category, some traditions may maintain actual connections to non-human sources. The influence network theory suggests that Anunnaki guidance continues through human intermediaries who may not fully understand what they serve. They believe they follow tradition. They believe they access spiritual truth. But the ultimate source of what they transmit may be more concrete than they imagine. Across cultures, certain experiences suggest the presence of observers. The feeling of being watched when no one is visible. The sense that something just moved at the edge of perception. The dream encounters with beings who communicate with apparent purpose. These experiences are typically dismissed as psychological artifacts. The brain, we are told, evolved to detect observers because failing to detect a predator was fatal. We see watchers where none exist because false positives were safer than false negatives. This explanation has merit. Human perception is indeed biased toward detecting presence. But bias does not preclude accurate perception. Sometimes the feeling of being watched corresponds to actual watching. If the Anunnaki remain on Earth, they would, presumably, watch. Observation is the purpose of concealed presence, and observation that spans millennia would develop sophistication beyond human imagination. The signs of watching would be subtle, a glimpse at the edge of vision that vanishes when focused upon, a presence felt in dreams that seems to communicate without words, synchronicities that feel arranged rather than random. These experiences are common enough to have names in every culture: guardian spirits, ancestors, angels. The sense that something accompanies human life, watching without interfering. Perhaps these experiences reflect actual observation, not imagination projecting comfort, but perception detecting reality. The watchers who have observed humanity from the beginning may still be watching, and our nervous systems may be capable of sensing their attention. This would explain why the feeling of being watched often accompanies moments of decision. When humans face significant choices, the watchers may pay closer attention. When the trajectory of a life hangs in balance, the observers may lean in. We feel them because they are present. We sense their attention because it is real. The signs of watching are not fantasy, but detection of something our conscious minds cannot fully process. If the Anunnaki never truly left, the concept of return requires reframing. Return implies previous departure. But if they remained hidden, what is anticipated is not return, but revelation. Not arrival, but disclosure. Many traditions anticipate divine return. The Second Coming in Christianity, the arrival of the Mahdi in Islam, the return of the gods in various indigenous traditions. These expectations may reflect intuition that the hidden presence will eventually become visible again. The question is why they would choose to reveal themselves. What would trigger the transition from concealment to visibility? One possibility is that concealment becomes unsustainable. Human technology is advancing rapidly. Our ability to detect the previously undetectable is growing. Underwater exploration, underground mapping, satellite surveillance, sensor networks. The hiding places may be shrinking. If discovery becomes inevitable, controlled revelation may be preferable to unexpected exposure. The Anunnaki, if they exist, might choose to reveal themselves on their own terms, rather than have their presence discovered accidentally. Another possibility is that human development reaches a threshold that triggers disclosure. Perhaps they are waiting for us to achieve certain technological capabilities. Perhaps they are waiting for social development to reach a level where contact would not destabilize us completely. The ancient promise of return often includes conditions. When humanity is ready, when the time is right, when certain signs appear. These conditions may reflect actual thresholds that the observers are monitoring. Crisis could also trigger revelation. If humanity faces existential threat that hidden intervention cannot address, open intervention might become necessary. The observers might step from shadow to prevent the destruction of their project. This pattern appears in many traditions. The gods return when things are worst. Divine intervention comes at the moment of greatest need. Perhaps this reflects memory of actual interventions in the past and anticipation of intervention in the future. It is important to acknowledge the alternative. The Anunnaki may have truly departed. They may not exist in any form that persists to the present. The evidence for hidden presence is circumstantial, and circumstantial evidence can support multiple conclusions. Human psychology generates experiences that feel like observation when no observer is present. Human pattern recognition finds connections where none exist. Human desire for meaning creates narratives that impose order on random events. The feeling of being watched may be entirely internal. The intervention events may be coincidence. The contact experiences may be misinterpretation or fabrication. The evidence may be noise, not signal. This skeptical position has its own form of humility. It acknowledges human limitation in a different way. We are alone, and our sense of being watched reflects not reality, but need. We create stories of hidden presence because solitude is unbearable. The honest answer is that we do not know. The evidence permits multiple interpretations. The experience of being observed does not prove observation. The pattern of narrow survival does not prove intervention. The reports of contact do not prove contact. What we can say is that the question remains open. The evidence is neither conclusive nor dismissible. The possibility of hidden Anunnaki presence remains neither proven nor refuted. And perhaps this uncertainty is itself significant. Perhaps the boundary between hidden presence and pure imagination is deliberately maintained. Perhaps the watchers, if they exist, prefer to remain at the edge of certainty, neither confirmed nor denied. What does this possibility mean for individual human life? If the Anunnaki never left, how should we relate to their potential presence? One response is discomfort. The idea that we are observed without consent, that our lives are data in an experiment, that our sense of autonomy may be partially illusory. These thoughts disturb. We prefer to believe we are free agents in an unobserved universe. Another response is comfort. The idea that we are not alone, that something watches with potential for intervention, that extinction is prevented by forces beyond ourselves. These thoughts reassure. We are held in a story larger than our individual lives. Both responses may be valid simultaneously. Being watched is both violation and protection. Being part of a larger project is both diminishment and significance. The hidden presence, if it exists, evokes contradictory emotions because it is inherently ambivalent. Perhaps the appropriate response is attention. If watchers exist, becoming aware of them changes the relationship. Observation that is detected differs from observation that is not. The watched who know they are watched relate differently to their watchers. This attention need not take religious form. It need not involve worship or submission. It can be simple acknowledgement that the universe may contain more than we perceive, that our lives may be witnessed, that we may be, in some sense, performing for an audience we cannot see. This awareness can inform how we live. If our actions are observed, perhaps they carry more weight. If our development matters to something beyond ourselves, perhaps it matters more to us. The possibility of hidden presence can intensify rather than diminish human experience. Beyond individual implications, the possibility of hidden Anunnaki presence has collective significance. If they observe humanity as a whole, what are they observing? What patterns would interest watchers with a timeline of millennia? They would see the cycles of civilization: rise, peak, decline, fall, and new rise. The same pattern repeating across cultures and centuries. They would see the slow accumulation of knowledge and capability punctuated by catastrophic losses. They would see the expansion of human population from thousands to billions, the transformation of planetary surface by human activity, the development of technology that increasingly approaches their own capabilities. From their perspective, human history might look like a growth curve: slow development for most of the span, then explosive acceleration in recent centuries. They might be particularly attentive now as the experiment enters a new phase. They would see our conflicts. The wars that seem to us epical might appear to them as minor turbulence. But they would also see patterns within the conflict, tendencies that repeat, mistakes that recur, opportunities that are missed again and again. What would they make of our current moment? A species with the power to destroy itself. A civilization transforming the planet's climate. A technology racing ahead of wisdom. A global population connected and divided simultaneously. If they intervene at critical moments, this may be such a moment. The thresholds we approach, nuclear capability, artificial intelligence, ecological collapse, may warrant their attention more than anything since the last global crisis. Or they may simply watch. They may have seen such thresholds before in their long observation. They may trust that the species will find its way as it has found its way before. Intervention may remain in reserve, waiting for crisis that has not yet arrived. The possibility of hidden Anunnaki presence intersects with religious belief in complex ways. If beings from the ancient texts still exist and still observe, what does this mean for faith traditions that emerged after their supposed departure? One view holds that the Anunnaki were not truly divine. They were advanced beings mistaken for gods by primitive humans. The later religious traditions that emerged after their departure represent human spirituality developing independently. In this view, the Anunnaki presence, if it continues, does not diminish genuine spiritual development. The hidden observers are not gods, but observers. The divine, if it exists, transcends even them. Another view holds that the Anunnaki represent an aspect of genuine divinity. They were not merely mistaken for gods, but were actual embodiments of cosmic forces. Their continued presence would be continuous divine attention to human affairs. In this view, the religious traditions that emerged after their departure may have been guided by them. The prophets and founders may have received actual communication from hidden sources. Religion may be less human invention than it appears. The tension between these views cannot be resolved with available evidence. The relationship between the Anunnaki and ultimate reality, between advanced beings and genuine divinity remains unclear. But the possibility itself has theological implications. If we are observed, we are not alone in the cosmos. If something intervenes to preserve us, something values our continuation. If the watchers watch, existence is not indifferent to human fate. These implications can coexist with many theological frameworks. They can challenge or complement existing belief. They introduce new dimensions, but do not necessarily contradict established faith. Honest consideration must acknowledge what we do not have. We do not have unambiguous physical evidence of hidden Anunnaki presence. We do not have recovered technology. We do not have captured beings. We do not have documentation of their continued activities. The evidence that exists is interpretive. We have ancient texts that can be read multiple ways. We have unexplained phenomena that could have conventional explanations. We have experiences that could be psychological rather than perceptual. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But neither does the evidence we have rise to the level of proof. The possibility of hidden presence remains possibility, not established fact. Those who claim certainty either way overstate their position. Those who know the Anunnaki remain cannot demonstrate their knowledge. Those who know the Anunnaki departed cannot prove a negative. What we can do is remain open to evidence. If the hidden presence exists, evidence may accumulate over time. Technology may detect what it could not before. Disclosure may come from unexpected sources. The boundary between possibility and certainty may shift, and we can attend to our own experience. If the sense of being watched is detection rather than projection, attention may refine that detection. If the signs of presence are real, looking for them carefully may make them clearer. The absence of proof does not require dismissal. It requires patience. The question of hidden Anunnaki presence may not be answerable in our lifetimes, but holding the question open allows evidence to arrive when it does. Living with uncertainty is its own spiritual practice. Not knowing whether we are observed or alone, not knowing whether intervention occurs or events are random, not knowing whether the ancient beings persist or perished. This uncertainty can be uncomfortable, but also generative. Uncertainty keeps us attentive. If we knew for certain we were observed, we might perform for the observers. If we knew for certain we were alone, we might dismiss experiences that suggest presence. Uncertainty allows authentic response to whatever is actually occurring. Uncertainty also protects autonomy. If we knew the Anunnaki remained and observed, we might subordinate ourselves to their perceived wishes. We might abandon our own development in favor of seeking their approval. Uncertainty forces us to develop on our own terms while remaining open to larger context. The boundary between belief and disbelief is where genuine inquiry occurs. Those who have already concluded stop looking. Those who remain uncertain continue to observe, continue to question, continue to allow new information to shape understanding. Perhaps this uncertainty is itself part of the design. If the watchers wished to be certainly known, they could reveal themselves. If they wished to be certainly unknown, they could cease all activity that leaves traces. The maintenance of uncertainty suggests intention. We are meant to wonder. We are meant to look and not quite see. We are meant to feel the presence without confirming it. The uncertainty is not accident, but arrangement. As night deepens and sleep approaches, these questions settle rather than resolve. What if the Anunnaki never truly left? What if they watch from shadows? What if human history unfolds under observation we cannot confirm? These questions need not be answered to be meaningful. They open awareness rather than closing it. They invite attention rather than demanding conclusion. They suggest dimensions of reality that ordinary awareness does not register. In the darkness, the boundary between known and unknown softens. The certainties of daylight become less certain. The possibilities that reason dismisses become temporarily plausible. Perhaps this is when they are most present, when human consciousness relaxes its grip on ordinary reality, when the doors of perception open slightly wider. Perhaps the night is when watchers watch most closely. Or perhaps the darkness is simply darkness, the unknown simply unknown, the feeling of presence simply human psychology reaching for connection. Both possibilities can coexist in the space before sleep. The mind need not choose. It can hold the question without forcing resolution. Some traditions speak of an ancient agreement, a covenant between the Anunnaki and humanity that governs their relationship across time. They would withdraw from visibility, but continue to observe. Humanity would develop independently, but under distant guidance. If such an agreement exists, it would explain much. The departure that was not complete departure. The presence that is not open presence. The intervention that is not constant intervention. Covenants of this nature appear across religious traditions. God's covenant with Abraham, the compact between rulers and ruled, the agreements that structure long-term relationships. Perhaps the current arrangement is not their decision alone, but mutual agreement. Perhaps humanity at some point chose development over direct guidance. Perhaps we asked them to step back while remaining near. This interpretation places responsibility differently. We are not merely observed subjects, but participating parties. The hidden presence reflects our choice as much as theirs. The arrangement serves both sides of the relationship. If this is true, the question of revelation becomes more complex. Breaking an agreement requires grounds. The hidden presence may not reveal itself until conditions of the original covenant are met. What conditions might those be? Perhaps technological parity, when humanity develops capabilities that match those of the observers. Perhaps spiritual maturation, when humanity demonstrates readiness for open relationship. Perhaps simple time, the completion of a cycle measured in millennia. The ancient agreement, if it exists, may still govern, and we, who have forgotten it was made, still live within its terms. Imagine for a moment the perspective of the watchers, millennia of observation, countless generations of humans born, living, dying, civilizations rising and falling like breath. What would they think of us? What patterns would they see that we cannot see from within? They would see potential repeatedly wasted, individuals of remarkable capability destroyed by conflict, societies on the verge of breakthrough collapsed by war or disaster. The same mistakes made across centuries by people who never learned what their predecessors learned. They might feel frustration. If they care about human development, watching the same errors recur would be painful. Knowing what we could become and watching us repeatedly fail to become it might evoke something like grief. Or they might feel patience. From their long perspective, the delays might seem temporary. The failures might seem instructive. The repeated mistakes might seem necessary steps in a learning process that simply takes time. They would see moments of transcendence, individual humans rising above limitations to create beauty, discover truth, express love in ways that serve no evolutionary purpose, but reveal something beyond survival. These moments might be what they watch for, the evidence that the experiment is working, the signs that the potential they seeded is developing into something remarkable. From their perspective, the question might not be whether humanity will succeed, but when. Not whether the potential will manifest, but how. They have waited millennia already. They can wait more. Perhaps the most significant evidence of the Anunnaki is not external, but internal. The capacities within humanity that exceed what evolution seems to require. The consciousness that contemplates its own existence. The creativity that makes meaning where none is given. If the Anunnaki modified humanity, their fingerprints would be within us. The genetic capacity for symbolic thought. The neural structures that enable abstract reasoning. The emotional depths that make love and grief possible. We carry their work in ourselves. Every human who wonders about existence, creates art, loves beyond self-interest, expresses something the Anunnaki may have intended. We are evidence of their intervention. This internal evidence does not require their continued presence to be valid. Whether they watch or departed, their legacy persists in human nature itself. But if they watch their creation in action. Every human achievement expresses what they made possible. Every human failure reveals limits they could not overcome. The signs within may be what they most want to see. Not the external drama of history, but the internal development of consciousness. Not what we do, but what we become. In this sense, every human life is evidence. Every moment of awareness is data. Every choice is information about whether the experiment is succeeding. After all consideration, the question remains, what if the Anunnaki never truly left Earth? The evidence is ambiguous. The reasoning is speculative. The conclusion is uncertain. And perhaps it should remain uncertain. Perhaps the question is more valuable than any answer would be. Perhaps wondering opens awareness that knowing would close. If they exist and watch, they watch a species that wonders about them, that cannot forget them despite millennia of absence, that tells and retells their story across cultures and generations. If they departed and are gone, the wondering still has value. It reminds us that our understanding is incomplete, that the cosmos may contain more than we perceive, that humility before mystery is appropriate. The question of hidden presence is ultimately a question about the nature of reality. Is the universe empty of observers beyond ourselves? Or is it layered with attention we cannot directly perceive? Science cannot currently answer this question. Religion offers answers that cannot be verified. Philosophy can only clarify what is at stake. We are left with experience, the feeling of presence or absence, the sense that we are observed or alone, the intuition that something watches or nothing watches. This experience, whatever its source, shapes how we live. Those who feel observed live differently than those who feel alone. Those who sense larger context make different choices than those who perceive only immediate reality. Whatever the truth of their continued presence, we inherit from the Anunnaki, the stories that shaped civilization, the symbols that structure meaning, the questions that drive inquiry. If they created humanity, we are their descendants in the most literal sense. Their genetic investment persists in every human being. Their intervention echoes in every human capacity. If they taught the first civilizations, we build on foundations they established. The technologies of writing, mathematics, astronomy, all trace to civilizations they allegedly influenced. Every advancement since rests on what they began. If they remain and observe, the relationship continues in real time. Our choices still matter to something beyond ourselves. Our development still proceeds under witness. This inheritance can be held with gratitude or resentment. We can appreciate what we received or resent that we did not choose it. We can honor the ancestors or reject their influence, but we cannot escape the inheritance. It is woven into our being. The question is only how we relate to what we are and where we came from. The Anunnaki, whether present or departed, shaped what humanity became. That shaping persists in us. We are the living result of their ancient intervention. As sleep approaches, these considerations can settle into quiet. The questions need not be resolved. The possibilities need not be chosen between. The uncertainty can simply be. In the state between waking and sleeping, the boundaries soften. The distinction between observed and unobserved, between alone and accompanied, becomes less sharp. Perhaps this is when their presence, if it exists, is most accessible. When the noise of daily consciousness quiets. When the mind opens to inputs it normally filters. Or perhaps sleep is simply sleep, a biological necessity that requires no metaphysical interpretation. A natural state that does not connect to anything beyond itself. Both possibilities can be held as you drift toward rest. The wondering can continue into dreams. The questions can persist without demanding answers. If watchers watch, let them watch sleep. If nothing watches, let sleep come anyway. The question of presence does not require waking attention to persist. What if the Anunnaki never truly left Earth? Then we are not alone. Then something observes. Then the feeling of presence that has haunted humanity since the beginning reflects actual presence. Then our history unfolds under witness. Then our choices matter beyond immediate consequence. Then the development of humanity is observed by those who initiated it. What if they remained? Then the underground may hold more than geology. Then the oceans may harbor more than marine life. Then the sky we watch may be watching back. What if they walk among us? Then some we meet are not what they appear. Then the stranger with unusual insight may be stranger than we imagine. Then the help that comes at critical moments may come from sources we cannot perceive. What if they wait for something? Then our development has destination. Then history moves toward a moment they anticipate. Then the question of revelation is a question of timing, not possibility. What if they watch this night? Then sleep occurs under observation. Then dreams may be witnessed. Then rest is held within attention larger than we know. These questions persist beyond any single night. They have persisted across millennia. They will persist as long as humans remember that something older than humanity once walked this earth. The Anunnaki may have departed. They may remain. The question itself is their most enduring legacy. Sleep well, dream without fear, and wonder, if you will, what watches as you rest. The night holds its secrets. The ancient ones hold theirs. And somewhere in the space between knowing and not knowing, the truth waits to be discovered, or perhaps to be revealed. When the time is right, when the watchers choose, when the hidden presence decides that concealment has served its purpose. Until then, we wonder. We watch for signs. We feel the presence we cannot confirm. And we sleep, as humans have always slept, uncertain whether something greater watches over us. Good night. Rest well, and let the questions settle like stars into the darkness.